Welcome everyone to our
Hey,
Friday
everyone.
training. Yes.
Let me give an intro. Well, you're going to have to edit this.
Okay, I'll edit it.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Entrepreneur Factory weekly instructional video. You've got both Jim and Boyd here today, and Boyd's going to be speaking specifically on how to speak compellingly in public. I'm going to turn the time over to him because he's so compelling and can speak in public. I told him first that I was going to introduce us as we are now nationwide. We are coast to coast. All you have to do is listen to your podcast wherever you listen to them.
Well, this isn't the podcast, though.
Oh, gosh, good gosh, the instructional video.
I forgot. Yeah, this is instructional.
I started it, all right.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a story. And this is one that was kind of funny for me anyway. So I was running a convention in Atlanta, and we had a pretty good named person named Dan Clark who was going to be speaking at it. Well, I was speaking before him and giving some training and some other things. And then Dan kept saying, I want to have you play my intro reel, which is what he always does. And he had already been here once before. And so I told the graphics or the AV guys, don't play it. I'm going to introduce him. And so he was he didn't know what I was going to do. And so I gave my presentation that I was doing, speaking before him, and then I introduced him. Now, I knew Dan Clark from years ago, before he played football for the University of Utah. I knew Dan Clark. And so I gave an example of what it was like, and I had everybody rolling in the seats because we had some funny experiences in Ireland, and that's where I met him, was in Ireland. And so anyway, we had, and then I just simply said, and now it's time for Dan Clark to come up here and try to entertain you. And he is so flustered with this at that point. And so, but he got up there and he's the professional, and he started off by telling his own story to rebuttal mine. And everybody was laughing between the two of us. But, you know, one of the things that you've got to understand is, and we're not just talking about public speaking, we're actually talking a little more about doing something online. And so it's a little different in public than to speak online. Okay. My second story that goes along with that, a year and a half ago, Jim and I started the Business Success Conference. We were doing a conference that was going to be in person, and it got canceled 2 days before we were to give it because of COVID. Well, we quickly pivoted. We created a 4-day, 9 or 10 hours a day from 8 till 5 or 6. I don't remember how long it was. We had 9 presenters every day with an hour lunch in between, and we did it for 4 days. So we had 36 presenters or presentations, and we had people from all over the world. But I got to tell you, Dan Clark was one of those people that I called and said, hey, I know that you don't have anything scheduled. And he says, how do you know that? And I said, because I know everything's been canceled. And I said, so how would you like to speak at my conference here? And he says, I've never spoken on something that's not in person. I says, Dan, you're going to have to get used to this. Would you like to try it out on this? I don't know how to do that. I says, are you sure? Now, this is 2 weeks. He would have had 2 weeks about a week and a half to figure it out. But you know what? He said no. I asked another big name speaker, and I got the same thing. They did not know how to speak on Zoom or anything else that was not live. They had only learned to do things in live, and they just simply, as Dan put it, he says, I got to see the audience and I got to hear them laugh. I've got to hear them, groan when I tell certain stories. And I want to be there and watch their faces so I can, and I said, you can't do that. You can see a few people online if you're doing a meeting, but we're doing a webinar. So you got to teach them and you got to train them. And he had no clue how to do it. Now he does now. It's been a year and a half, and he's up to it, and he's doing it quite well. In fact, a few weeks ago, he was talking in Australia from his home in Olympus Cove. And that's the thing. He has now learned how to do it. He does do in-person things, but he's not leaving the country yet. And that's one of the things he's decided not to do until COVID really gets bad. Got to remember, he had COVID over Christmas last year because he went and spoke at a conference that decided, oh, it's okay, we're going to be able to do this. And so he was over in Nashville, Tennessee. And out of the people that were there, 400 people came down with COVID. There was about 1,000 people there, and he was one of them who came down with COVID. He was in the hospital over Christmas Day. He went in on 2 or 3 days before. Now, why do I tell this story? It is important for us all to know how to speak in front of people and make sure that it's not just in front of people, it's in front of people online even. And so we're going to talk about that. And so one of the first things I'm going to talk to you about is what that second presenter I asked to do. And his excuse was, I've never spoken in front of a camera. It's got to be different. Well, it turns out he was a bit camera shy. And whenever he had been on anything where they recorded him and had a cameraman around, he always was nervous, and you could tell it. Well, he's not that way now. In fact, Jim and I had him on our podcast a few months ago, and he does really well now. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. He said, I will learn this. I will learn this. And he was probably one of the first ones to get out there and do it. But
I don't mean to cut in, but there's an absolute added benefit to not just public speaking, but public speaking on Zoom or whatever mechanism you choose. Think of what time and energy and expense Dan Clark would have had to fly to Australia and then maybe be quarantined. I mean, there's with the new there's some quarantine stuff going on. Now you can just do it from home. I mean, it's absolutely compelling and fun, and I think you have to save a lot of money if you don't have to fly to Australia.
Well, I'm going to tell one more story that goes along with COVID and this. There was a convention that was going to be held in late April, and they usually have about 800 of their 50,000 people that are here in the United States at the convention. It was going to be held in Dallas, Texas. They had the convention center there all booked out for 1,000 people, and just in case it went a little higher. Well, COVID shut down everything on March 15th. So they knew they were not going to be able to do it. Well, one of the things that they did was they threw out some things out online, and I got on there and I said, hey, we just had a 4-day conference. We had people from 10 different countries. We had hundreds of people on it. Try an online conference. And so they did. I gave them some ideas. It was too big for me to try to handle. And so but I gave them ideas, and they found some people who had done some conferences using Zoom to do this conference. They ended up with about 35,000 people who attended it. Here's why. They said, okay, we can't have it in person, everyone. So instead of us paying for, normally we pay for your hotel room if you pay for your airline ticket. Well, today we're going to give everyone who comes, who is going to sign up and actually attends this conference, we're going to give them $200. It's worth it to us to get as many of you on this conference call, on this webinar. And it was a 3-day thing. And they went and talked to a lot of their speakers. There was a couple speakers, and they were the big professional people who had to say, no, we don't know how to do it, or we don't have that. But they found some that did. And then their people who were speaking, they came up to speed very quickly. In fact, I taught 3 or 4 of them how to do it like what we're doing right now. Well, as the conference went on, they found that in past years, when the people went back from the conference, and it was mainly the upper management that came, and they would share the information down, they'd see a little bit of a bump in how much business they got because of the conference. This conference, with all those people on, they had a 16% bump in sales for life insurance. Okay.
Do you know what the attendance numbers were before when they did the conference?
It was about 800 people that were there normally. That was just mainly the upper management. But now they invited everyone, and they had 35,000, just over 35,000. It was almost 36,000. They actually had 40,000 that registered, but some people didn't show up, and so they didn't get their $200 because they did. They were meticulous to make sure you attended all 3 days. Do you know? They saw a 16% increase in sales. They'd never seen more than a 4% before then. So they did it again when they usually have 2 conferences a year, one in April and one in September, October area. They did it last year in October, and they had 41,000 people that attended. They had a 22% increase in sales after that conference. They'd never had that before. So why do I tell you this? They found that they will never go back to in-live conventions because they get a bigger return on their investment by giving everybody a couple $100 to be there. And if you're there, you're going to increase your sales, and it's going to increase their bottom line. And it has. So much so that they have canceled all of their contracts that they had, and they're going to be having only online conferences from now on. Now, I have not heard what the numbers were for this year because I no longer help them as much as I did before. And so, but I mean, this is amazing stuff. So knowing how to speak online and getting everything so it works the right way and doing it the right way is one of the things you've got to do. So that's what I'm going to cover real quick. So, and the first thing I want to tell you about is, depending on how you're going to be speaking, generally, before you get on the camera, you've got to prepare. You've got to know what you're going to be speaking about. Some of these big name people, they kind of meander between stories that they've told before. And that's great. But when you get in front of a camera, it's a bit different. You got to know what you've got. If you have a fear of being seen on camera or a fear of presenting on camera, you got to get over that. Then you've also got to know exactly what you're going to say and in what order. So I'm going to just go from here. And so let's go on, but you've got to be sure that your camera works well, that it's not doing things. Jeff says you got to make sure your internet is up to it. And that's my next point. So thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
So understand that when you're in front of that camera, you're not alone. There are lots of people watching you, yes. But one of the things you got to be paying attention to is that you got to make sure that you're presenting to the camera, not trying to talk around and talk to the whole audience, because it's only the camera that makes a difference. So you got to be looking at the camera, and you've got to know what you're going to be speaking about. And that's what we've done here today. Now, I don't have a PowerPoint today, so excuse me if I don't bring up slides. This is something that is coming from a presentation by someone else that I was on, but I wanted to go through this. Now, actually, the next thing I was going to say is you've got to make sure all the preparations are in place, and that includes, is your internet up to it? Is your computer up to it? We've had a couple times when we've been doing some of our podcasts when they put in we record it, but the problem is their computer wasn't capturing it like it should. And it drives us nuts because then it garbles it all up and all kinds of things. It's sometimes the computer, Sometimes it's the internet connection. One of the things that you need to be paying attention to is the time of day. Now, to be quite honest, at 3:30 about my time, it gets really, really slow for my internet because all the kids from school are coming home and they're getting on their devices, they're playing games, they're doing homework, whatever it might be, watching a movie, and it takes up bandwidth and it takes up everybody's bandwidth. So my bandwidth goes way down at 3:30, but before 3:30, I have great bandwidth. So you got to know that. You got to know when you're going to have to do something about that or not do it when it's going to be terrible. Okay, same thing with your computer. You got to make sure your computer has the capacity and is a high enough resolution on the camera and the microphones they're picking up. In fact, I very seldom tell people this, but they really need to have a separate microphone for their computer. And it doesn't matter what type of a microphone, it's always going to be better having a separate microphone than the one that's built into a laptop. So in fact, I've got sitting at this one computer, I have 3 different microphones, 2 different cameras, and I have another microphone and camera on my other computer. And that's so that if something goes wrong, I can switch to something else. If you're only depending on your camera that's on top of your laptop or your microphone on top of your laptop, it could go out or not work right. So before you do it, make sure you check it out and then, take care of those kind of things. And I do recommend having a separate camera and a separate microphone. All right, next, let's go on to breathing. One of the things, we had a guy on one of our conferences and he just went in and he wasn't breathing. One of the things I do before I do any conference, I take a deep breath. I think about it and it allows me to collect all my thoughts and put them out there so I can do that. I know Jim does this too, because I've seen him go, okay.
I'd like to hyperventilate before I start, and then
there you go. So you don't have to breathe again, huh?
Exactly.
So, all right. So breathing is one thing that you want to, you do something that helps you relax so that you're not in front of a camera when you're just tense and things like that. Now, some people, they want to warm up their voice. I'm sorry, you get what you get from me, so, but there are some people who, I'm going, what, you're going to go sing or something? No, I'm going to be speaking and I want to get, okay, whatever. So, but that it is something that you want to do. And, one of the big things that I read one time from, I don't remember who it was now, but he said, I always do big yawns just before because it allows me to take a lot of extra oxygen in and it warms up my voice at the same time. So there you go. Now, one of the other things I'm going to tell you about, and we're going to get to really how you're going to captivate the audience in a minute. But one of the things that is important is you've got to have the right dress code. I had a person that I invited to come and speak. Yeah, okay, that's a good dress code, Jim. Yes. Mine. Do you like my name on my? Oh, I don't have my name on this. I don't have my name on any right now. I got to get some that do. But let me tell you, a dress code is something that you want to pay attention to. Now, if you're going to invite someone, you got to know that they're going to probably dress the way they normally do. And so if you want somebody who looks really sharp and wears a jacket and such, you don't invite anyone from Facebook because they don't. Even in front of the congressional committee, they required him to go out and get a jacket so that he could present to them. He says, well, I don't have one. And he says, well, you're going to have to go buy one. And by tomorrow morning, you will have one before you come in here. So understand if there's a dress code, and it's just as important online as it is in person. Now, so just keep that in mind. And I was at a conference one time, and the guy on the stage had a torn T-shirt and torn pants, and that was his style. And I found that almost everybody in the audience started just zoning out or leaving. And this is a big conference. There was probably 2,000 people in that, and they just left because, I mean, he was talking about some pretty cool stuff, but he didn't talk to the right audience by dressing to the right audience. So you got to be sure to do that. And it is so important. And some people just, it's like my son. I had a son who went to a job interview, and he's wearing cut jeans, you know, the ones that you buy that way now. And he was wearing a really nice t-shirt, but it was a t-shirt. And he went to a job interview for a sales position. Do you think he got it? Nope. Because he wasn't trying to sell to kids. They wanted him to go and sell to business people. And he dressed all completely wrong. And he came home that night and he says, Dad, I don't understand this. You know, why didn't I get this job? You know, I've got all this experience, you know, working with you and others. And I says, how were you dressed? And he says, well, I was like this. And I said, there's your problem. You are going after a job that is going to require somebody who wears, you know, at least great Levi's or, you know, denims that aren't cut, dark blue, and you're going to have a jacket, maybe not a tie, but a jacket and a sports shirt, you know, and that's the people you're going to be talking to and selling to. But that's what they were looking for. They were looking to make sure that your first impression was going to be the right first impression for them, and that wasn't it. Well, he said the next time he went in, he wore something for a different interview for a competitor company, and they hired him. And he says, I didn't answer any different questions. I just dressed different. And he says, really? Dressing makes that big of a difference? And I said, yes, you've got to understand that. He now understands that. In fact, he's now in the hiring position. And he says, I thought of that. And I want to hire people that will be of the caliber, dressed to the caliber of what we're going to sell to.
You know, Boyd, I don't want to date us, but I think we were all trained to dress for the position above what you were applying for.
Yes.
So that, you know, a suit and tie is not inappropriate. And, you know, even today, but there are a lot of kids that dress casual for a high-paying job.
Yep. Okay, so let's get on to your performance on camera. This is much the same as a performance on stage. I'm going to tell you, but the key is you've got to look natural. You've got to have your hand expressions, and if you're holding a microphone, you've got to be able to, you know, make it look like you're holding it. And I know some people who do that, but you know, with microphones today, you don't need to be holding a microphone if you're at your desk, whether you're standing or sitting, it doesn't matter. Now, I've had some people say you need to stand to present. And can I tell you, that comes from those people who perform on stage. They don't know how to sit to perform. They don't know how to sit to talk to people. And that is a big thing. And so for them, standing is important. To others, it's not. And I have done both. And when I have somebody evaluate it, they say, well, I don't see any difference. You're standing in the same position. Now, I move a little more this way when I'm standing. I am sitting right now. But just understand that sometimes standing for your type of presentation, you need to pay attention to whether standing or sitting will be appropriate. Okay. And that's a good thing. Now, you always want to look natural on camera. You don't want to have, you know, I was on one where the lady who was interviewing me had so much makeup on, I thought that it was going to fall off of her while we talked, because you could see it moving in our tape. You know, don't go that far. I mean, it's one thing to be in front of a camera when you're, you know, and they're shooting you professionally, But when you're in front of this type of a camera, you don't need to have that kind of makeup. I mean, yes, there are some times when you want to have, make your eyebrows shine a little better, or, show up more, whatever. And so, but just make sure that your appearance is good. All right, now let's talk about some technical things. And the very first thing they talk about is consider standing, although it doesn't work with everybody. And so that's first thing. Make sure you are positioned in front of the camera, and you must be able to see yourself. And where you're looking at yourself needs to be right beside the camera. And so that is a big thing, because you'll tend to look at yourself. Occasionally you'll look at the camera, but most of the time you're looking at yourself. And if it's near enough to it, you can't hardly tell. Now, you also want to make sure that you're not so close you're looking like this. That's way too close, and, they get to see the pores on your nose. And you don't want to be so far back that you almost show up. You got to make it so that you're in the frame and that people can see your expression, because communication is only 30% what you say. Actually, some people say it's 20% of what you say, and it's 40% of your body language. Then the other 40% is the atmosphere and how you work with the people, and you just can't get that on a Zoom call. But they're saying that the body language and your speech together, you need to be far enough away that you can have body language. You can see my hands moving every once in a while. I talk with my hands a lot of times. Yes, Jim's trying to show us his nose. So make sure that, and one of the things I saw one time was somebody, he's always going like this, which is pointing out. And you got to be careful with that when you're on a camera, because it can take over the whole camera. And then the camera has to readjust, and sometimes it doesn't readjust. And suddenly you're out of focus for 5 minutes until you do another gesture, and suddenly it readjusts again. So be careful with that. And then make sure that you're right in fairly well in the center of it. Now, one of the other things you need to do is many times, especially if you're going to be a trainer, you want to be speaking with charisma. So you got to be charismatic. So there are some people that say that you're supposed to be talking as though everybody is waiting for your next word. This is very hard to do on a camera, but it is doable. The key is always make sure that you're building on what you've already said. And it comes back to the preparation. If you know what you're going to be saying, it's going to work. I have found a couple of these professionals who, from the stage, it works well for them to be on the fly, but on camera, it doesn't, because when they try to do the dramatic pause, sometimes it just looks like they forgot what they were saying. So you got to be careful with that, okay? And then one thing that they talk about is making sure that your voice matches the message. You don't want to go too soft when you're trying to make a point. And you don't want to go too loud unless it is you're making a strong point. So these are things that are just going to keep you going. Now, the most important thing about doing either public speaking or on Zoom speaking is it's about you. If you don't feel confident, if you don't show that you know what you're doing, it will show through. And that is one of the big things that I learned long ago. I went to a conference one time when I did not know the course material. And so I was really reading the PowerPoint. It wasn't PowerPoint at that time, it was something else. And I didn't know what the next slide was going to be. I love being able to know what I'm going to be teaching about long time in advance. I'm going to read it. I'm going to understand it. I'm going to be doing the things that we need to. Now, one of the other things I talk about, and this is a little harder on webinars and others is keeping your audience engaged. Now, how do you interact with them? How do you get them to work with you? Well, sometimes it's asking questions. Sometimes it's having polls. Sometimes it is just simply saying, hey, who's done this? That's a question, of course. But when you do it, make sure that you implement it in. You're going to utilize it. And then the next time you do that, more people will respond. The more you utilize the information they give you, the more engaged they will be, because they say, "Ooh, I would have said this instead." And that's something you want to have them do. So be sure you do that. Now, one of the things they talk about is, do you keep them in suspense? Sometimes. That's what this is. Yeah, it's dramatic pause. But then when you do that, you make sure that they understand what you're going to say, what you're saying. It's a way of making sure that you really hammer home that message you're trying to do. Now, the other thing is you've got to have emotions, and you've got to build those emotions into it. So you've got to make sure that that's there. Now, one of the big things that I've always found very, very important is, again, stories. I started with a story. In fact, I started with 3 stories, and that is important to do. Start with a story and then end with a story. If you do it right, you're going to do part of the story, and then you're going to tell the other part of the story at the end. And my other part of the story is about the Dan Clark story. One of the things that happened with that introduction that I did for Dan Clark, he was extremely surprised that I got everybody laughing about him and I and the experiences we had. As he was closing, he again referred back to when we were together back in Ireland. And he talked about his story of when he was leaving. And he talked about how it felt to be leaving these people that he had been working with for 2 years. And so it was an important thing. As he talked to these people, he says, when is it the appropriate time for you to feel like you're leaving friends? And he says, how about right now? I have gotten to know you, you've gotten to know me, and for the last hour and 15 minutes, I've talked to you. And he went on with a story that went along with the trip to Ireland. And as he did, it brought it all together, all the different things he was saying, and talking about how this is the newspaper industry. So he was talking about, how do you pull people into your newspaper and get them so that you get an emotional high as you finish your story. So sometimes that's what it needs to be. Sometimes you want them to say, oh, but sometimes you want to grab their heartstrings and help them want to do something because of that. That's one of the things I would recommend, is always finish with a story. And that's what I have. Jim, do you have other things that you want to tell about?
I just turned my mic back on. No, it's absolutely a necessary evil in today's world that we all communicate well online. And the conference that you've referred to a couple of times was such a compelling conference, and to pull it together so quickly was monumental. But the world's not going to go back to the way that it was, and so. It's fun. I've done it. We've both done it. It's fun to get in front of an audience, and you do get to hear their laughs and get to ask maybe more compelling questions when you're in person. But today, you have to be able to communicate well online, and that's what this whole conference or this whole lesson has been about today. So thank you for pulling that together. And
one thing I did skip, and I just noticed it in my notes, is if you don't have something like this or something that makes a good background, try to have a green screen behind you. so that you can do what Jim is doing right now with his Walter Cronkite background. Or he can change it to all kinds of other backgrounds.
I've got some good ones.
Oh, you've got some great ones, you know. Here's his amoeba one. So, but the key is find the right background and don't make it so it distracts from what you're doing. The one that the Walter Cronkite one, now that's one that distracts me because I'm going, what is it? What, you can't read those notes
Why do I
because they're
have
not
so
in
many
its
notes?
language. But one of the key things, though, is if you have something that's distracting, it will keep them from listening to what the message is you're giving. This one is a good one that Jim is using, or something stable like what I have behind me. Even though people may say, oh, what's this over here? You know, all the Star Trek and other paraphernalia there, but they see the books and it's static and it doesn't move, so it works great. Having the world spinning with everything else kind of in its place is a good one. They used to use that on television all the time for a very good reason. It always talked about.
Speaking of backgrounds, I do have to say this. I've got this one that I use from time to time in networking groups, and it's compelling enough that people actually ask me about it and stuff, but other people are completely distracted by it every time the elephant goes by.
Right.
So I don't use that. I do use the static one. I use that for professional business meetings and stuff. And sometimes when I'm feeling, foolish or whatever, I use the elephant. But it's inside of a networking group. This is more of a business environment, and this is businessy.
Okay, and that's very true. So the key is make sure that you find the right background for you. Don't be changing it during your when you're speaking, because that can really be distracting too. I have one where I have a train. It's a passenger train, one of the local subway type trains they have around here, and it comes to a stop and then it takes off again. And I have people who've told me, I want to see who's getting off that train. I want to see who's getting on the train. And I didn't hear a word you said, so I never use that. So yeah. That's the key. You got to make sure that it is one that's going to, be good. But make sure you do have a background that is conducive to what you're doing. I saw one. There was one presenter on our convention that we had that 36 presentations. They were in their laundry room. And so you could see the laundry detergents on the shelf behind their head, and you saw the bins that they had over here. And I thought, okay.
I do
not
have
the right background.
I do have to say this, and I'm sensitive to what I display in the background. But I absolutely have become fascinated with the new way of communicating, Zoom or whatever. I've become fascinated with people's background.
Oh yeah.
And there's one guy that you and I both know him. He's in an office, like a closet. There's a ceiling fan that spins around, and it breaks the light and breaks the light and breaks the light. There's another person that you might have been on this conference with me, but she was literally in her sewing room, and she had bolts of fabric, like all stacked, like stacks and stacks of bolts of fabric. I thought, yes. These are fascinating. Some people are literally in their bathroom. Some people are literally in their closet. Yep. And it's just become a fascination to me. What is in people's background? Boyd, I know, is a Trekkie, so I'm not surprised at all by what I see on his shelf. But be aware of very much aware of what you're displaying. It's as important, I think, as what you wear. Maybe even the information. Don't do it from your bathroom, or your laundry room, or whatever. It's your professional image when you're speaking. So
that's true. So be careful what you have on your background, and it does matter. Now, there are times when, doing it from the kitchen or from a laundry room is just fine. And so just understand that. Mm-hmm. So in fact, it was funny that there was one of the conferences we had, it's now been over a year, and the guy was in a closet.
Mhm.
And so he had shirts that were actually stopping right here above him, and he was sitting on the ground, and and so you were in the closet, and every once in a while he'd move the camera on his notebook, and you'd see the shirts just right here, and you're going, this is funny.
There's that, and I've seen, I'm not picking on anybody, but I've seen like pink children's play equipment behind them. So they
Yeah.
clearly were in their daughter's bedroom or whatever. But he even kind of said, this was the one place I could get some peace and tranquility.
Exactly. And so if you have to use something like that, go ahead and explain it and tell them why you're there. And so don't apologize, just simply explain it and move on. And once people know it, because if they're sitting here going, okay, I can almost see something up there, and of course the camera's not going to move, but
Right.
they think, maybe I'll see it.
Look around.
They're looking around. It's one of those things that are kind of funny to play with. But if you explain it right up front, they understand that it's not going to come. They're not going to get to see the swing or the shirts above you or whatever it might be, or how bored Jim can be.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for attending today. I hope you got something out of that. Any questions from anybody out there? Questions?
No questions popping up.
No, I don't see any.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your attention, and always remember that every Tuesday we do this from about 2:15 to 3:15. And of course, we have our weekly podcasts, which are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. What do we talk about, Boyd?
Well, it's called the Entrepreneur Factory. So everything is about business and building businesses, and especially if you're an entrepreneur. So Monday is all about marketing, really, and occasionally we'll have somebody come in and talk about sales. On Wednesday, we always talk about taking your business to the next level. And so we'll have business coaches or business owners who have done that, taken their business to the next level, to give you some ideas of how to do that. And on Friday, it's all about entrepreneurship. And it's all about from people who haven't started their business, they're thinking about starting the business, to have started their business, and they're still solopreneurs, how to go from there. And it's all about the things you don't know that you don't know on that particular show. And when we interview entrepreneurs, it's a lot of fun to say, so what do you wish you had known before you started? And some of the things are the most basic of things you would have said, well, I would have thought you would have thought about that before now. Structure of your business. That's a good one.
Yep.
Some people don't understand that there is a difference between the structures. And did you know, if you want to do a medical device, you can never, ever, ever sell it to anyone in the medical industry unless you're a corporation. So there you go.
Think about that.
Yep. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.